Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you another video. As you can tell from up there, it is another special edition home video release. This one was released on both DVD and Blu-ray. I have the DVD version of it. It, of course, is the Shout Factory Collector's Edition for what is, in my opinion, one of the best slasher sequels ever made, and a worthy follow-up to the original classic, Halloween 2, More of the Night That He Came Home. And there is the cover that they did, because if you know anything about Shout Factory releases, they always do a special cover in addition to releasing it with the original cover. See, there's the original cover right there. In case you're wondering where the discs are, one is in my PlayStation 4, the other's in the computer. There's the original one, like I said, and then there's that one. I actually prefer that cover for this. It's not often that I actually prefer a new cover they do when they release a film on video. But when it's artwork like that and it's that cool, you gotta go with it. Unlike something like, let's say, the Monster Squad, where you look at it and go, really? This is the cover they went with instead of the original. Now, I have a couple notes here, and I'm going to be talking about each and every aspect of it. Well, first of all, I'll say the transfer of the film is pretty good. I mean, I don't know how good it looks on the Blu-ray since I have the DVD version, but it's a pretty good transfer for DVD. You get both a theatrical cut on the first disc, which is where most of the features are, and on the second disc, you get the TV edit. And this is not the TV edit that you would see, which is basically just a TV version of the main film, just with some stuff edited out like how I originally saw it. It is a completely different edit of the film, where you look at it and go, really, that's how they edited it? Some edits is like, really? Really? That shot doesn't even look like it goes there. That just kind of kills the flow of the scene. Now the ones that are like, really, you took scenes from another part of the movie and added it there. It's a little interesting thing to watch, especially if you watch it back to back with the original film, which I did because I watched the original film twice, once for each commentary before I watched the TV version, and I really didn't notice. The only really novel thing about watching the TV edit is you actually get to see how some of the deleted scenes, which I'll touch on in a little bit, would have looked inserted back into the film. Only, I'd say, two of them really add anything overall to the film, which I'll talk about when I get to the deleted scenes. Now, before we get to the commentaries, we have a featurette called The Nightmare Isn't Over Yet. Appropriate title for a featurette. It has interviews with the director Rick Rosenthal, actors Lance Guest, Leo Rossi, Nancy Stevens, and of course Michael Myers himself, Dick Warlock. We got the executive producer Irwin Yablans on it. And while he is a good interview, he's the one out of all of them who really takes a knife to the film. I mean, he does it in a way where he's not trashing the film, but he's basically saying, the film wasn't as good. You could tell he's going at it with a double-edged sword. It's like, yeah, we made money and it was good, but it just wasn't as artistically great as the first one. You basically, the whole theater of the mind aspect, which, yeah, it is a kind of a valid criticism with the film. I mean, it doesn't play with your mind as much as the first one does, but it does still capture the spirit of the first film well. It just ups the ante a little bit. Yeah, I'm in that camp that I liked it. It tried to recreate the feeling of the first film, but just made it more in line with the years that had passed since the original film's release, so it felt more like an 80s slasher film. Of course, not everyone's going to feel that way, and Yablans is definitely in that group, but he's entitled to his opinion, but I'm entitled to disagree with him. Then we got the co-composer Alan Howarth on there talking about how he helped John Carpenter with the score. How Carpenter did the bass one, and then he added some rhythm to it. And John is still on the track. It's just that all the stuff he added into it to make it sound more like a score is there. If there's any complaints about this making a featurette, is that we got no John Carpenter, which is kind of a shame, because, I mean, he went with Shout Factory when they did the thing, but this was a couple years before that, so maybe he didn't trust Shout Factory yet. And he's like, I'll pass. Maybe scheduling conflicts. It's actually a question I'd actually like to ask him, because I know that he was mainly the writer and, a little bit of a producer on this one, and he directed a couple scenes. But that's still enough for him to talk about. Like, I'd like to have heard his side of the story on aspects such as the fact that he added some scenes into the film. I'd love to hear him talk about that. I mean, we have we have Dick Warlock and Rosenthal talk about that, but it would have been nice to get his side of the story. Debra Hill is no longer with us, so unfortunately we obviously couldn't get her on theirs. That's what I like about the copy of Halloween 1 I have, because she's actually on that in the interview, so that was nice at least hear her thoughts on the first film. And of course, since Donald Pleasence is no longer with us, obviously he's not going to be in there, but no one has a bad word to say about Donald Pleasence on this DVD. That just shows what type of a person he was. He was well respected by everyone that worked with him. And there's no Akkad on here. I know Mustafa has passed away, but his son could have had something to say, but I guess, well, that's nothing. And the other disappointing absentee is Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, they talk about her, and they're all glowingly talking about her, but she's not on here, which kind of puzzles me. I mean, she always appreciates the first film for giving her a career, but this one is like, you don't have anything to say about Halloween 2? You could have just shown up and, like, said a couple things about it. I know if they were going to do one for H2O, you probably would have been on it, but it's one of those things that's like a really weird thing, like, really? I mean, it would have been interesting to see her do the commentary with Dick Warlock, but alas. Maybe one day she'll do a commentary for the first film, at least, if she hasn't done so already. Speaking of commentaries, we have two. The first one is with Rick Rosenthal and his buddy Leo Rossi. And they have a good back and forth. I mean, a couple of the stories they talk about on the commentary, they mention in the Nightmare Isn't Over Yet thing, but since they're talking together, they're reminiscing about it together, and that's what it comes across as, is friends reminiscing. Which is why it's good to see these two together, because if you don't know the story, they mention it in both the commentary and in the featurette. They went to an acting class together, and that's how they met, and they became friends. And that's also why, when Rick was casting the film, he got a lot of people he knew from the acting class in there, because, you know, in one of his first films, he wanted to work with people he trusted, which is a good sentiment, especially if you want to focus a little bit more on the technical aspects. You cast people who you know are going to do a good job, so that if you have to give them any direction, it should be minor at most. You know, as another director said, cast strong, you don't really have to worry about it. And as Hitchcock once said, that if they were doing something that he didn't want, well then, my dear, I would have to direct you. I like that line. If there's any complaint, is in the Rick one, there is a few moments of dead air, which I noticed. I'm like looking at it like, really? Maybe just something I noticed because I watched the commentaries for this one after I went back and watched the commentaries for The Thing, and I noticed there was hardly any dead air in that one. I think mainly because John Carpenter and Kurt Russell have a lot to say to one another about that film, but with this one, there's probably a couple moments where they're like, yeah, we got nothing to say. Now, the Dick Warlock one, I forget the name of the guy who was on there with him, but it was, I think one of the guys from Shout Factory, or a big fan of the film. It had a good rapport, but it was more like an interview commentary, that one, so it has a different feel, but Warlock is a very entertaining guy. He has a lot of insightful stories. He mentions some stuff I didn't know, like I didn't know that he got his start at Disney, and I did not know that he was apparently the stunt guy inside the shark cage during the Hooper scene from Jaws, scene where Hooper was originally supposed to die. I didn't know that, and nice to know that now. And I didn't know he continued to do stunt work for Kurt Russell up until, I think, Tango and Cash, and they haven't really spoken since then, when he had to pull out because of weight issues or something. That's kind of petty if they really haven't talked, but the way he makes it seem is like he sent letters to Kurt through his agent, but he hasn't heard anything back, so maybe the agent hasn't given them to Kurt. There's one of the little speculation things he mentions. Dick talks a lot about how he approached certain scenes, both from an acting standpoint and from a stunt work standpoint, which it's nice to get that there. Talks about some other behind-the-scenes moments, like the cameos of his kids, like the Boombox Kid is his kid, so Warlock meet Warlock. And one of the kids that's looking for Ben Tramer is his son. I think it's the same son, too, or it could be different sons, because they don't look like they're that far apart in age. I already talked about those ones on my notes. And it's very insightful there. And of course, they also do this typical thing, yeah, I think the series should have ended here. And of course, Warlock does do a little shot at the fact that they kept making Michael bulkier, and that he was disappointed that some of the Michaels after him actually didn't go back to the first two films to study their character, like, I think it was George Wilbur he mentioned. Or maybe it was the guy that did 5 when he saw them at conventions. It was like, no, I didn't go back, I didn't see the need, basically. Which kind of annoyed him, and it's an annoyance thing, because it's like, if you're going to play the same character, at least go back to the previous films and see what you'd have to capture in order to make people believe you are playing the same character. I mean, I don't know if they did that with Jason, but with Jason, you don't really... Jason, you probably should do that, but if you know the essence of the character, you could probably give it your own interpretation, especially if the character's not shown a lot. But with Michael, you definitely should. Because you do kind of notice some minor differences as you go from 1 and 2 to 4 and 5 and 6. You see Michael moves a little differently there. And 7, he seems to be back to how he was in the first 2 ones. And I think that's the only Michael that Warlock Hurd actually went back and looked at the first 2 films, which is nice. Especially since Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. You better go back and look at it. And, of course, he talks about the conventions. He tells a story about how he first heard about the conventions, and then, of course, the time that all the Michaels are at the conventions, and someone asked him to do the walk, and he did a little joke thing. It's like, come on, watch, fellas, you might learn something. But I could just imagine the fan reaction to that in the building. They would have been like, ooh. Probably looking at the other Michaels to see their reactions. Probably a couple of them would have chuckled, and maybe George would have been like... And then we got deleted scenes, which do have commentary by Rick Rosenthal. I watched him with the commentary. It's interesting, like a lot of the little moments that had more character moments. He said he did that because he wanted to build up the newer characters. But they were cut for pacing reasons. And it's mostly in the second act if you look at it. A lot of it is basically more or less filler when you look at it outside of the film and try to imagine how it would be back in the main film. But there's 2 moments that I think would have worked. One is a scene that kind of pays off the whole I'll get you a Coke later thing. Mainly because the part after the Coke is in the final film. It's the part where Jimmy's like, they should have handled him more carefully. It actually shows him come back in the room. So it makes that scene make a little bit more sense. And nice to see him actually be a man of his word. And another one would have been later when he comes back to tell Laurie that Michael's dead. She freaks out and they have to sedate her. Which adds a little bit more clarity to the scene later when she's catatonic. And we see it's a reaction to how much they gave her. That, you know, maybe she's allergic to whatever they gave her to calm her down. Or, as Jimmy thinks in the line he says, maybe Mixer gave her too much. I mean, he was at the country club and he's drunk, as they mentioned earlier in the film. And another deleted scene is like, I think I did a good job, but there won't be much of a scar, really. So, it's probably him just hoping that he did a good job considering his condition. Not only does that scene give more context for Laurie's coma, but the lights go out during it. And as Rick mentioned at one point, he wanted to create a sense of isolation and vulnerability, and that scene would have done it. And that's what a couple of the other scenes would have done, like a little bit of an extension to the scene where the one nurse who's dating Bud hears the bell ring. There was a little bit more before that. But he wanted to use to create some isolation and vulnerability, but they're nice to see, but I could see why some of them, except for those 2 I mentioned, were edited. All the rest, like, yeah, they could have been cut. But it's nice to see them in the TV version, but they're there mostly to, you know, be filler to make up for what was edited out, because it's the TV version. And the last thing we got is Horror's Hallowed Ground, which is Sean Clark visiting the shooting locations, you know, comparing it to how it looked in the past. He does have an interview with someone whose grandparents used to own the Elrond house. Some little interesting stories there. See that the hospital location is now a VA hospital. They had to get away from that one quickly once they got the shots. And nothing really much else to say about it. The only other thing is that on the second disc, there's also a thing to download the script, which I haven't yet. Maybe one of these days I'll look at it and maybe do like a little reading of parts of it. But it's nice that it's there. But as you can tell from how I'm glowing about this, this is an excellent special edition. If you are a fan of slasher films, if you're a fan of the Halloween series, and you haven't gotten your hands on this, it comes with my recommendation. Get it on Blu-ray, get it on DVD, get it in a box, get it with a Fox, get it here or there. You should get it anywhere. Get it into your collection now. Because remember, the boogeyman is watching, even when you're too scared to look.